My first encounter or interaction with a medium was last fall. And she is was from San Antonio. And as we got through the discussion, I don't know what prompted or triggered it, but she said, well, there's a lineage in Abraham, and you're of that lineage. And I thought, oh. And of course I related to the biblical Abraham, so I was totally clueless. Then she went on to say how there was a family, I think, called Melchizedek or something of that nature. And again, this is totally outside my realm of experience, knowledge, or information, but and the medium went on to explain how they had many thoughts comparable to the expressions you provide, some flavoring of, well, they go a little bit this way and Abraham goes a little bit this way. Can you speak to that at all to help my mind clarify?
Well, first we would like to say that we are all in this together, in that we are speaking from non-physical perspective, you are speaking from physical perspective, but it is all that which we all are, and we are all part of this co-creative environment. It's always difficult from a non-physical perspective to explain without distortion how the universe works. And we have no business explaining anything beyond what any of you are asking for anyway. So this combining of physical and non-physical is something that man has been searching for. All religions result because people are reaching for an understanding of how they, in their physical form, fit into the greater scheme of things. And so we are really not very excited or interested about trying to bridge everything that everybody's saying about everything, because it just makes you crazy. Instead, what we would say is that every physical being is an extension of source energy and has access to that broader perspective. And in fact, the guidance system that is within you, that you feel in the form of emotion, is a very literal, visceral, in the moment, specific and accurate rendition of your alignment or misalignment with that source energy in any point in time. So when you begin to pay attention to your own connection, and you don't try too hard to compare whatever your connection is with however somebody else is translating their connection. Then what begins, Esther asks us over and over again, Abraham, why are they explaining their experience like that? How could their experience be so different from my experience? And we say, there are not two of you who are the same. You all have access to infinite intelligence. Do not see it as a classroom of teachers that is teaching a specific philosophy. Instead, see it as infinite intelligence that's available to all, you see. You can tell when you've tapped in, because when you tap in to that which is your inner being, or that which is source energy, when you tap in, meaning when you are vibrationally in alignment with it, and you're living your day-to-day experiences, which means you are constantly asking, the information that is flowing through you will constantly reflect the momentum of your life experience, and your terminology will continue to expand to replicate the uniqueness of what you are living, you see. You can always feel when you are in alignment, because what flows through you expands, as does your exposure to your experience. Yes.
Thank you. All right, last question. There's maybe it's a U.S., but a Western phrase that says, your system is only good as your weakest link. And if my weakest link or someone's weakest link is a fear over whatever, fear over finances, fear over career, but they feel completely safe about their health, their physical health, well-being. They feel completely safe about traveling in a car. They're other than that, they have no worries. They have inordinate amount of trust and utter trust in that they're absolutely fine. If that weakest link, though, is one worry over one thing, are you attracting resistance into all these other areas in which you have no worries or concerns?
Well, we are enjoying so much your wonderful question. This is a very important thing to discuss, and will take us into a place we have not been before as clearly. Rather than, in physical form, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Now, that's something very familiar, isn't it? And it makes sense in many regards. But when you try to apply it to this, it is unsettling. We would use a little different terminology, and as we speak these words, you will feel the different emphasis. It is not the weakest link that hinders you. It is the dominant beating of it. In other words, it's not the fact that it's the weakest, it's the fact that it has become the most dominant. Now maybe that's why it's the weakest. In other words, attention to it amplifies it and brings it to the... But when you think in terms of, when I think a thought, that thought activates. And if I think it often, it activates often, and then it becomes a dominant vibration. And dominant vibrations are strong points of attraction. So you could have 10 aspects of your life, 9 of them not going very well, and 1 going really well. And if that one that's going really well has most of your attention, then you're going to be living a wonderful life, and those other 9 aspects have to begin to reflect the allowing. In like manner, if you could have 9 things going really well and 1 thing going wrong, and you could be focused upon the 1 thing that's going wrong so much that you could not activate well-being in any of them. In other words, the thing that's going wrong is causing resistance within you. Most people, however, have the ability to change subjects, to focus upon other things. Most of you are not singly focused. But that is the reason that we are wanting to guide you a little bit toward, not a little bit, but incessantly, toward caring about how you feel first. Because when you care how you feel, then you are not, as so many people are, most physical beings find what's wrong and focus on it and try to fix it, not realizing that the attention to it causes unnecessary resistance in their vibration that then does bleed out over other things. The reason we're answering your question so carefully is because it is possible for you to vibrate in appreciation on one subject and in despair on another subject. And it just depends upon how often those subjects are activated within you. What we like to encourage you to play with is the idea that every subject that is possible or that you've ever experienced is really 2 subjects, what's wanted and lack of it. So when you pick up the stick subject, a subject, pretend it's a stick with 2 ends on it, of wellness. Well, wellness is on one end and illness is on the other, but it's the same subject, but it's very different vibrations. So these different categories that you were talking about could reflect the different sticks. And what we're encouraging is that anytime you have something that's moving through your mind and moving through your conversation, that means it is active. And now your work, if we were standing in your physical shoes, our quest would be to move up the vibrational meter on it to make sure that we've practiced ourselves into a good feeling place on all sticks. The other night, Jerry and Esther were in the hotel room in Portland, and they were sleeping, and Esther awakened thinking that she was hearing her cell phone ring. And then she sort of went back to sleep, and then she thought she heard it again. And she sort of went back to sleep, and then she thought she heard it again, and now she's awake enough that she's feeling concerned that her cell phone is ringing in the middle of the night. In other words, so that means there was some old residual there somewhere, or she would not have had a moment's worry about it. She would have just said, will I answer it, will I not answer it? But as she answered it, it was with some sense that something might be going wrong. And it was a stranger, a person that she did not know, on the other end of the phone, crying and saying, please help me. I need an angel. Please help me. And Esther said, okay, what can I do? And this young man is saying, I am lost. I have run away. I don't know where I am, and I'm bleeding. And will you help me? Will you help me? Will you help me? And Esther said, yes, I will help you. Look around, and what do you see? And what he wanted to tell Esther was how bad his parents had been to him and how he had been mistreated. And he was so lost in the despair of his moment that even though he had someone capable and willing of helping him, he could not elicit the help from her because he was so involved in explaining how unfairly he had been treated. And so Esther listened to him and said to him, do you have family? He said, well, I called you. You have my mother's telephone number. And Esther said, what number did you dial? And he told her the number but the area code was different than the area code he had dialed. The rest of the number was the same. She tried to explain to him that if he would hang up and dial again and dial the numbers that he really thought that he was dialing, that he would reach his mother. And at that point, he began explaining again how his parents did not love him and how his parents would not. So he could not even make the telephone work because he was so convinced that what he wanted could not come about. But instead, the fairies of the universe had him dial Esther. So Esther said to him, is there anything around you? Can you knock on a door? Is there any place that you can ask someone where you are? And Esther can hear him knocking on a window. And then he says, where am I? And Esther hears a person say, you are at 1025 South Frio Street in San Antonio. And Esther is writing it down. And then Esther said, I will call your parents and tell them where you are. And he says, how will you reach my parents? You don't know where. Do you live next to my parents? My parents will not listen to you. And are you going to help me? Are you going to help me? And Esther said, stay right there. I will help you. And then Esther called Hello Infone and said, I have an address. Could you please tell me what the place is? And Hello Infone told her where she was calling, and so she called that place. He was standing in front of a hotel. She talked to a front desk clerk who verified that he was standing there. And then she called his parents and said, this is going to be a long story. Do you have a little bit of time? Now, what we are getting at with this long, everything that everyone wants, there are 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 immediate remedies that the universe has already lined up that are right there. The question is, how much resistance have you been practicing that is holding you apart from being able to receive the result that you're reaching for? This was an extreme example. In other words, this was someone who had powerful desire, maybe the most powerful desire Esther has heard spoken into her ear in years. He was begging her not to hang up. He was begging her to help him. But at the same time, he was in a place where he was refusing to allow the very help that he was asking for. It was an exaggerated example of what everybody does all day, every day, asking for something that you are convinced that you cannot let in. So when Esther reached his house, which was 400 miles from where he was, the young man who answered the phone did not even want to talk to Esther until she told him his name. She said, are you so-and-so? I think I'm talking to your older brother. May I speak with your mother or your father? Well, they are asleep, he said. Well, wake them up, Esther said. I have some things that I'm really want. And now Esther is hearing him walking down and knocking on the door. And now Esther is hearing some of what her new friend was describing, a reluctance on the part of them to be of any help. In other words, they did not want to be awakened. They did not want to hear about this. Esther could feel all of it. But as Esther visited with this father, once he awakened a little bit, and once she explained to him what she was feeling about his son and where he was, and that everything was all right, but that he really could use a telephone call from him, and that Esther thought that even if he just called and spoke with him a little bit, that a lot of the trouble would be soothed in the process. Esther was the angel that the fairies of the universe orchestrated, who was the best possible bridger to assist in this process, you see. And so it's a long story, but the reason that we are getting to it in this way is because physical man is asking for all kinds of things that sometimes he's ready to receive and sometimes not ready to receive. Esther said, Abraham, why don't you guys get your story straight? Why aren't you all telling the same story? Why are so many people killing each other over religion every day as we are confused and in competition about who has the truth? And we said, if all students were in the same place, then all teachers would be saying the same thing. But that is not the case. In other words, the universe is always lining up for you the perfect rendezvous that is taking into consideration the combination of not only what you're asking for, but your readiness to hear, you see.